Are smart objects really smart? You bet. In this chapter, you discover how to make non-destructive changes using smart objects, an incredible layer feature. In this lesson, I show you how to even do more non-destructive editing using smart objects. I'm starting out by activating the headset file, and of course, music background and headset are both in your Chapter 7 folder. And I am going to my Paths panel, activating headphones, going back to layers, Alt or Option key, double-clicking on background, and then clicking on the Add a Layer Mask button twice. I am now deactivating this path, and if you remember why, it's because I don't want to accidentally transform the path only and not the image. I'm activating the image, taking my Move tool, and dragging and dropping this over to my background image and then closing up the other file and not saving it. Okay, so this is what I have. You'll notice that sometimes my path panel actually activates the path again. And I am going to click on that again because I am going to transform this. What I want to show you now is one of the huge benefits to using smart objects. And one of the benefits is that you can scale more freely. So I'm going to duplicate this layer before I begin. And I'm holding down my Alt key or Option key as I drag it down to the dog-eared document. And I'm calling it Head Set Large. And I'll be using this later for something. And I'm turning off the visibility. I'm taking this layer and just naming it Headset so that we have proper names. And I've got this layer active. And you'll see by pressing Command or Control T, and I shrink this guy down. Now I can either grab a corner and start scaling this down. I can hold the Shift key, or I can just come in here and type at the very top in the options that I want this to be 5% by 5%. Really small. Hit the Return key. Okay, so I've got this teeny, tiny little headset here. Okay, so you're the designer and you're composing your layout, and all of a sudden somebody comes and says, that headset has to be as large as the background or close to it. So you, of course, press Control T, you grab a corner, you can start scaling this up, and look what you got. You already lost your image or your information that's creating that headset. I'll press Return, and you'll see that this is what you get. Not totally beneficial. But yet, if I take a layer, and let me turn the visibility off on that other one, and I right-click. Now, I need to right-click off to the side. I can choose to convert this to a smart object. And a little icon appears. You also see my masks go away. They're actually now embedded inside this Photoshop file that's embedded inside my working music background file. And you'd think, wow, embedding files inside of other files could be kind of tricky and also create large files, but it doesn't create that much of a large file, and the time it saves you is huge. And you can always take out the smart object later or convert it by rasterizing it to reduce the file size once you're done. But what I can do now is I can do a lot more free thinking. I can take this file, and in fact, I'm going to duplicate it first, holding down my Alt key, Headset Small. But watch as I just take this Headset Small file and I press Control T, shrink it down really small. And notice again at the top, the size is in the width and height text boxes. And if I take this and I reposition it and hit the Return key or the Enter key, and I go back to using Command or Control T, it still remembers that this is 17% of the original size. It keeps that baseline of 100% intact so that you don't accidentally take a file that was 3 inches wide and make it 6 inches wide, because then you still are degrading your image. But note that I can scale this up, and I haven't lost any of the quality of that image. It's maintained it for me. And you notice at the top, I'm still at 88.1% of that original. So for this particular image, I know somebody said to me, we need this about 25% of the size. So I can even type in 25, click on the chain, reposition it, and hit the Return key. And now I've got my exact size. Now I'm turning on my larger size because maybe I want to do some sort of effect where somebody is zooming in to see detail. So I've got this image, and I'm going to combine some of the other techniques that I've used in previous lessons so that you can kind of put this all together. I am going to create a shape using the ellipse tool. I'm holding down my shift key to make a perfect circle. And I want to only see the detail area in that top headset. So what I'm going to do is create a clipping group. I'm sliding that shape underneath the headset large, because if you remember, when you want to clip to a layer, you have to take the shape that's to be clipped into the layer and put it underneath the layer that's going to be clipped. That's a mouthful. Nonetheless, my circle has to be underneath the headset. And what I can do is then select the headset large, and I can press Control-Alt-G or Command-Option-G. And that is the keyboard command for doing the same thing I did in Chapter 6, where I held down the Alt or Option key and I clicked on that line that separates the layers. So that's just the keyboard shortcut for doing this. You'll see that my shape is black, and that's what you're seeing a little bit through there. So you could change that little edge of the circle color to anything you want by double-clicking on that thumbnail and maybe even sampling a color. So we'll take like maybe a dark brown or something. That looks good. Okay, I also want to put a vector stroke on here. So I am just taking the stroke effect, and it's putting a black stroke as a default. And remember, this is vector, so it will look nice when it prints, if you are going to print, or it'll look good when it goes on a website. But I can choose a different color. Maybe I want to sample an orange color, so I'll just take a deep orange. And click OK, maybe change the size and change the position to be centered on my stroke, and click OK. Now I'm pressing V to go to my Move tool, and I'm repositioning this. Now notice what's going on here. I did not group or link my two layers together. So I am actually moving just the mask around, which is kind of fun because you can zoom into different areas if you want. I'm going to leave it back positioned where it was. I'm going to shift click to select the headset large, and I can either chain those together so that they both become selected at the same time, or if I want to keep them totally intact in their own little form, I can press Control or Command G, group them, and title this Zoom In. And now I can position them a little bit easier. Now I'm going to create a little zoom type effect here, and how I'm going to do that is just create a new layer. It's going to go on top. I'm taking my polygon lasso tool, which is of course hidden inside the lasso tool, and I'm just going to kind of fake where I'm zooming into, just so that I have something to work with. We'll say that we're zooming in here. Take this layer, and I'm going to change my color to go from maybe a white to a gold. Take my gradient tool and just kind of drag it down or up depending upon the direction I want it to go in. Now I have this on top, which is fine, but what I want to show you is I can add a mask to something as simple as this. In fact, I'm going to undo that, and the reason why is because when I clicked on Add a Mask, I had an active selection, and it made my mask actually a cutout of that selection. I'm pressing Control D or Command D, now adding a mask, big blank mask, taking my gradient tool and just clicking and dragging to kind of fade out that selection, and then sliding this underneath that layer. Okay, so now it looks a little better. I can play with the opacity or whatever if I want, but you can see that by using the Smart object, I was able to get a really small image and a large image from the same image. I'm going to go ahead and place one more thing in here before I finish up this lesson. I am going to go in, and I'm clicking on the topmost layer and choosing File, Place. And I'm going to take the fishbone layer and place this in. That's okay. Oof, a little overbearing. Scale it down a bit. position it at the bottom, and hit the return key. Now, when I place an Adobe Illustrator native file, it automatically comes in as a smart object. I can look at this and say, ugh, colors, maybe they worked for one of our ads, but not really this one. I'm going to make them all white. So I'm going to double click in the lower right-hand corner of the Smart Object thumbnail. This launches this in Adobe Illustrator. I can click on this fish, and I'm going to change it to an orange color, or maybe actually I had already mentioned I'm going to change it to white and change the text to white. And I'll leave it at that for now. And I'm going to save it. Now, before I save this, let me explain to you that this is not saving over the original. This is an embedded vector object that is placed inside my Photoshop image. It is called Vector Smart Object, and it does exist someplace, but it is in your system. It's not overwriting my original logo. A lot of people say, great, that's really cool, but what if I actually want to save a white logo? Well, there's always Save As, so you can do that. But what I'm going to do is just simply choose Save, close this file, return back to Photoshop, and you'll see that my file has been updated. If I wanted to go back and knock out that eye, I could go back into that file again. Now, what's great about these smart objects too is that the size has been maintained. This is a vector image, so even if I come in here and I press Control T and I decide that I'm going to use it 200% of the size, that is no problem at all, because since this is vector, it's maintaining its quality. So let's say that we want to just create this kind of as a neat graphic. That's fine. I'm pressing 5 to make it 50% opaque. Or we'll slide it down because I actually had the gradient tool selected. There we go. So I've got my cool little graphic stuff going on now. And maybe I want to even take this further. I am going to place another object. This is another Adobe Illustrator object. It's a paint spot. I want to use it a little bit smaller. That's good. But I'm going to duplicate it. And how I'm going to duplicate it is the bad way as far as layer names, but easy way if you're creating just simple little, you want to duplicate some things like trees, blades of grass. I'm holding down my Alt key and just dragging it to duplicate it, and it's creating copies in the Layers panel. Now I'm holding down the Control key to select the separate paint spots, and I'm changing the size of some of them. Remember, these are vector, so I can make them bigger or smaller. But then I decide that that color just isn't working. So I double click, open up the original file, change this to perhaps a white, and maybe even go in and change the transparency, bring that down a little bit. Save the file. Again, it's not overwriting the original. Close it. Go back, and all those layers that were related back to that original Illustrator artwork are changed at once. So great tool to use, making objects smart in order to create your composite.